Seraphina's designer heels slipped on the polished marble floor as she dropped to her knees, her $5,000 silk dress pooling around her. She sobbed hysterically, her expensive mascara running down her perfectly contoured face in dark streaks. She reached her trembling hands out, desperately begging for mercy in front of the entire VIP dining room. Standing above her, looking down with cold, devastating authority, was Lyra. She was the quiet, exhausted waitress Seraphina had violently humiliated just 2 weeks ago. But Lyra wasn't wearing a stained apron anymore. She was wearing a breathtaking custom-tailored power suit that commanded absolute respect. And, in her hand, she held the exact same crumpled $100 bill Seraphina had maliciously thrown right into her face. "You said I was nothing but the help, Seraphina," Lyra said, her powerful voice echoing through the dead-silent multi-million-dollar restaurant. "But you forgot one little detail. I don't just work here. I own the entire building. And you and your husband are never eating in my city ever again." Welcome back to Moments and Meanings. Before we uncover the shocking twist in today's story, take a quick moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below if you believe that service workers deserve the exact same respect as billionaires. In our world, some people truly believe that a shiny black credit card and a designer handbag give them the right to treat others like garbage. They judge a person's entire worth by the uniform they wear, completely forgetting that the universe has a funny way of testing our character. Today we are diving into a deeply emotional story about a ruthlessly entitled wife who publicly humiliated a humble waitress just to impress her toxic friends. But she had absolutely no idea that the nobody she was tormenting was actually the undercover owner of the most exclusive restaurant empire in the country. Get ready for a devastating, life-changing lesson in karma. Let's begin. The grand velvet-draped dining room of L'Eclipse, the city's most breathtaking and fiercely exclusive 5-star restaurant, was a sanctuary for the absolute elite. Securing a dinner reservation took 6 months, a massive bank account, and usually a personal connection to the mayor. The air smelled of white truffles and aged wine, and the soft, melodic hum of a live string quartet played in the background. For the billionaires, celebrities, and socialites who dined there, L'Eclipse was the ultimate playground to see and be seen. For Seraphina, it was her personal stage to project her absolute superiority. Seraphina was 32, breathtakingly beautiful, and entirely consumed by her own massive ego. She had married into extreme wealth, tying the knot with a highly ambitious real estate developer named Caspian. Caspian was currently in the middle of a high-stakes, incredibly stressful negotiation. He was desperately trying to secure a multi-million-dollar investment from a mysterious, anonymous private equity firm to save his over-leveraged company from quiet bankruptcy. If he didn't land the deal by the end of the month, their entire luxurious lifestyle would completely evaporate. But Seraphina didn't care about corporate stress or budgets. She cared about dominance. She believed that her worth was entirely determined by the $5,000 silk dresses she wore, the massive diamond ring on her finger, and her ability to make the people around her feel incredibly small. Strutting through the golden double doors of L'Eclipse for a highly publicized luxury luncheon, Seraphina adjusted her designer sunglasses, even though she was indoors. She was meeting her 2 incredibly wealthy, highly toxic socialite friends, Vesper and Delphine. Seraphina wanted to completely control the room. She wanted to prove that she was the absolute queen of their superficial social circle. As the maître d' bowed respectfully and led Seraphina's group to the best, most visible table in the center of the dining room, a quiet, observant woman was standing just a few feet away, holding a silver tray. Her name was Lyra. Lyra was wearing the restaurant's standard service uniform, a crisp white button-down shirt, a modest black apron, and sensible non-slip black shoes. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, practical bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, and kept her head bowed respectfully as the wealthy patrons walked past. To anyone looking, Lyra was completely invisible. She was just another waitress, a background character meant to carry heavy plates and refill water glasses. But underneath the modest apron, Lyra was a self-made titan. Lyra was actually the visionary founder and sole owner of L'Eclipse, as well as a massive international hospitality empire. She had grown up in absolute poverty, washing dishes in a greasy diner at 16 to pay for her mother's medical bills. Through decades of relentless hard work, brilliant investments, and unwavering passion, she had built a billion-dollar empire from the ground up. Despite her immense wealth, Lyra never let the money poison her soul. She deeply valued hard work and basic human decency. That was exactly why, 3 times a month, she stripped off her designer suits, put on a simple black apron, and worked undercover as a waitress in her own restaurant. She wanted to stay completely grounded. She wanted to ensure her staff was being treated fairly, and she wanted to see the true character of her ultra-wealthy clientele when they thought no one important was watching. As Seraphina gracefully took her seat at the center table, she loudly dropped her heavy diamond-encrusted designer handbag directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. Vesper and Delphine sat across from her, instantly beginning to gossip maliciously about the other women in the room. Lyra picked up her silver tray, took a deep breath, and walked calmly over to the table to greet them. "Good afternoon, ladies," Lyra said softly, her voice carrying a warm, genuine politeness. "Welcome to L'Eclipse. My name is Lyra, and it is my absolute pleasure to be serving you today. May I start you off with some sparkling water or perhaps a look at our vintage wine list?" Seraphina didn't even look up. She kept her eyes locked on her phone, intensely scrolling through social media. She slowly raised her hand and dismissively snapped her perfectly manicured fingers directly in Lyra's face. "Sparkling water. Ice, but not too much ice. And bring the lemon slices on a separate chilled plate," Seraphina demanded, her tone dripping with venomous entitlement. "And don't hover. I can't stand it when the help hovers." Vesper and Delphine giggled into their napkins, feeding Seraphina's toxic ego. Lyra remained perfectly composed. She didn't flinch. "Right away, ma'am." When Lyra returned a few moments later with the crystal water glasses and the chilled plate of lemons, she carefully began to place them on the table. As she reached across, her plain, unpolished fingernail briefly caught the edge of Seraphina's diamond-encrusted handbag, shifting it a fraction of an inch. It was a microscopic, entirely harmless movement. But to Seraphina, it was an unforgivable crime. "Excuse me." Seraphina gasped loudly, violently pulling her handbag away as if Lyra's touch had physically burned it. The entire dining room briefly went quiet. Lyra quickly stepped back, clasping her hands together. "I apologize, ma'am. I didn't mean to crowd your space. Do you have any earthly idea how much this bag costs?" Seraphina sneered, looking Lyra up and down with absolute, unfiltered disgust. She looked at Lyra's sensible, non-slipwork shoes, her plain apron, and her bare face. "This bag costs more than you will make in 5 years of carrying my dirty dishes. Do not touch my things with your cheap, greasy hands." "Seraphina, you're so bad," Delphine laughed maliciously, taking a sip of her water. "But she's right. It's so hard to find good staff these days. They just have no class." Lyra looked at the 3 women. She could have instantly snapped her fingers, summoned her security team, and had them permanently banned from the property. But Lyra was a deeply intelligent woman. She knew that true character reveals itself slowly. She wanted to see just how dark Seraphina's heart truly was. "I assure you it won't happen again," Lyra said quietly, keeping her expression completely neutral. "It better not," Seraphina scoffed, leaning back in her velvet chair and crossing her arms. "I expect absolute perfection. If you make one more mistake, I will personally speak to the manager and make sure you are fired before I even finish my appetizer. People like you need to learn your place." Seraphina smirked triumphantly at her friends, fully believing she had just asserted her absolute dominance over a helpless, pathetic worker. She thought her wealth made her an untouchable queen. But as Lyra walked quietly back to the kitchen, taking mental notes of the interaction, Seraphina had absolutely no idea that she had just insulted the very woman who held the absolute power to destroy her husband's entire corporate future. The trap had been flawlessly set. The luxurious atmosphere of L'Eclipse hummed with the soft clinking of crystal glasses and the elegant melodies of a live string quartet. But at the center table, the energy was entirely toxic. Seraphina, Vesper, and Delphine were halfway through their first bottle of vintage champagne, laughing maliciously as they judged the outfits of the other wealthy patrons in the room. Suddenly, Seraphina's diamond-encrusted smartphone buzzed violently against the pristine white tablecloth. It was her husband, Caspian. Seraphina rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out an annoyed sigh before answering the call. "Caspian, I am in the middle of an incredibly important lunch." "What do you want?" Seraphina, I need you to listen to me. Caspian's voice crackled through the phone, sounding deeply panicked and completely exhausted. The bank just called. They are threatening to freeze all of our accounts by the end of the week. Our entire survival depends on this meeting I have at 4 p.m. with the CEO of Aurelia Equity. If they don't sign the buyout contract today, we are completely bankrupt. We will lose the mansion, the cars, everything. Seraphina's face flushed with a sudden hot wave of embarrassment. She quickly glanced at Vesper and Delphine, terrified that her toxic friends had overheard her husband's desperate confession. Her entire social identity was built on the illusion of infinite, untouchable wealth. The mere thought of losing her status made her violently angry. I don't care about your pathetic corporate problems, Caspian. Seraphina hissed under her breath, her tone dripping with venom. I am eating at the most exclusive restaurant in the city. Do not stress me out with your incompetence. Just get the billionaire to sign the paper and fix it. She aggressively ended the call and slammed her phone face down onto the table, her heart pounding with a sudden, suffocating panic. Everything okay, babe? Vesper asked, swirling the champagne in her glass with a malicious smirk. Caspian sounds a little stressed. He's fine, Seraphina lied smoothly, forcing a fake, arrogant smile. Just closing another $50 million deal. You know how exhausting it is being married to a titan of industry. But deep down, Seraphina felt completely out of control. Her husband's panic had deeply fractured her fragile ego. She desperately needed to reassert her dominance. She needed a punching bag to prove to her friends and to herself that she was still an absolute queen. Right on cue, Lyra approached the table. Lyra was carrying a heavy silver tray balanced perfectly on one hand, holding 3 exquisite, beautifully plated main courses. She moved with quiet grace, her expression entirely neutral and professional. She carefully placed a plate of delicately seared sea bass in front of Delphine, a truffle risotto in front of Vesper, and finally, a perfectly cooked filet mignon in front of Seraphina. Your main courses, ladies, Lyra said softly, keeping her head bowed respectfully. Please enjoy. Seraphina stared down at her plate. The food was an absolute masterpiece, flawlessly prepared by a world-class chef. But Seraphina wasn't looking for a good meal. She was actively hunting for an excuse to be cruel. Seraphina picked up her heavy silver fork, poked the edge of the filet mignon, and immediately dropped the fork onto the porcelain plate with a loud, obnoxious clatter that echoed across the dining room. Is this some kind of sick joke? Seraphina demanded, her voice suddenly rising to a completely inappropriate, piercing volume. Several nearby billionaires turned their heads to look at the commotion. Lyra stopped, clasping her hands patiently behind her back. Is there an issue with your meal, ma'am? The issue is that you are completely incompetent. Seraphina shouted, standing up slightly from her velvet chair to tower over the quiet waitress. I asked for this steak to be cooked medium rare. This is clearly medium. It is completely ruined. Are you blind? Or just incredibly stupid? Vesper and Delphine giggled into their napkins, pulling out their phones to toxically record the drama for social media. Lyra looked at the steak. It was perfectly pink in the center, exactly medium rare. But Lyra knew better than to argue with an irrational, entitled bully. I sincerely apologize, ma'am, Lyra said, her voice remaining perfectly calm and unshakable. I will take it back to the kitchen immediately and have the chef prepare a new one for you. Lyra reached her hand out to take the plate away. That was the absolute point of no return. Seraphina didn't want a new steak. She wanted blood. As Lyra's hand neared the plate, Seraphina aggressively grabbed her crystal glass of expensive red wine and deliberately maliciously poured it directly onto the pristine white tablecloth. The dark red liquid splashed violently, dripping off the edge of the table and splashing directly onto Lyra's sensible black work shoes. Oops, Seraphina sneered, her eyes entirely void of human empathy. Looks like you have a mess to clean up, peasant. The entire dining room fell, dead silent. The string quartet slowly stopped playing. Every single wealthy patron in the room watched in absolute shock as the beautiful, entitled wife publicly tortured a helpless service worker. Lyra looked down at her stained shoes and then up at Seraphina's incredibly ugly, hateful expression. Lyra's eyes didn't show fear. They didn't show anger. They showed a deep, profound pity for the deeply broken woman standing in front of her. I will get a towel to clean the floor, ma'am, Lyra said softly. You do that. Seraphina scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. Then, to secure her absolute dominance, Seraphina reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. With a vicious, arrogant flick of her perfectly manicured fingers, Seraphina crumpled the $100 bill into a tight ball. She pulled her arm back and violently threw the crumpled money directly at Lyra's face. The heavy paper ball hit Lyra right on the cheekbone before dropping onto the red wine-stained marble floor. There's your tip for being completely pathetic, Seraphina commanded, her voice dripping with venomous cruelty. Now, get down on your knees and pick it up like the dog you are. Tension thick enough to cut with a knife hung over the restaurant. Lyra did not yell. She did not cry. She slowly, deliberately bent down and picked up the crumpled $100 bill from the wet floor. She stood back up, unfolding the money, and looked dead into Seraphina's eyes. Does treating people like garbage make you feel powerful, Seraphina? Lyra asked quietly, her voice carrying a strange, chilling weight that momentarily caught the entitled woman off guard. I don't need to feel powerful, Seraphina laughed maliciously, sitting back down and linking arms with her toxic friends. I am powerful. Now take your trash and get out of my sight before I have management throw you out on the street. Lyra smoothly slid the $100 bill into her apron pocket. She gave Seraphina one final, cold look that silently sealed the entitled woman's absolute destruction. I will remember this exact moment, Lyra said, softly. As Lyra turned and walked quietly back toward the kitchen, Seraphina and her toxic friends erupted into cruel laughter. Entirely convinced they had just won the ultimate victory. But as Seraphina sipped her champagne, she had absolutely no idea that she had just ruthlessly humiliated the exact same billionaire CEO her husband was currently begging for his corporate life. The countdown to Seraphina's total devastation had officially begun. Exactly 14 agonizing days had passed since Seraphina violently humiliated the quiet waitress in the middle of the luxury dining room. She had walked out of L'Eclipse that afternoon entirely convinced that she was untouchable, fully expecting her husband to return home with a multi-million-dollar signed contract to save their lavish lifestyle. But the triumphant corporate victory Seraphina had so eagerly anticipated never happened. Instead of handing Caspian the ultimate financial lifeline, the elusive CEO of Aurelia Equity had suddenly issued a frustrating, highly secretive delay. The CEO's lawyers had met with Caspian at 4 p.m. that day, only to coldly inform him that their boss needed 2 more weeks to thoroughly review the moral character of Caspian's company before signing the buyout. For Seraphina, those 2 weeks were a catastrophic, suffocating nightmare. Sitting in the massive, echoey living room of her sprawling mansion, Seraphina stared at her glowing laptop screen with bloodshot, exhausted eyes. The mansion was dead silent. All of the private chefs, maids, and landscapers had abruptly quit 3 days ago when their paychecks violently bounced. The power company had just sent their 3rd final shut-off notice, and the massive bank that held their mortgage had officially frozen all of their checking accounts. Seraphina's trembling fingers clicked the checkout button on a designer shopping website, desperately trying to purchase a $3,000 handbag to make herself feel better. A bright red error message violently flashed across the screen. Transaction denied. Insufficient funds. Seraphina slammed the laptop shut, her perfectly contoured face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Her entire superficial world was rapidly collapsing around her. Desperate for a distraction, she grabbed her diamond-encrusted smartphone and aggressively dialed her best friends, Vesper and Delphine, hoping to convince them to pay for a luxury spa day. The calls went straight to voicemail. Again and again. The toxic socialites had entirely abandoned her the exact second rumors of Caspian's bankruptcy began to spread through their wealthy circles. Seraphina was completely alone, drowning in a terrifying sea of unpaid bills and shattered delusions. The heavy oak front door of the mansion suddenly opened. Caspian walked into the foyer, looking absolutely destroyed. His expensive suit was heavily wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and he looked as though he had aged 10 years in the last 14 days. Caspian. Seraphina snapped, her toxic entitlement flaring up to mask her profound fear. My black card is declining. Vesper is ignoring my calls. How long are we going to live like peasants? Did you get the billionaire to sign the contract or not? Caspian looked at his wife with deeply exhausted, hollow eyes. The lawyers finally called back. The CEO of Aurelia Equity has officially concluded their 2-week evaluation. They are ready to finalize the deal. Seraphina let out a massive, dramatic sigh of relief, her arrogant smirk instantly returning. It's about time. I was starting to think we'd have to sell the yacht. When do the funds transfer? Not yet, Caspian said, his voice trembling with high-stakes anxiety. The CEO wants to sign the papers in person. Tonight, but there is a massive catch, Seraphina. The CEO specifically requested that you attend the dinner as well. They want to meet the woman behind the company. If we make a flawless impression, they sign the paper and we get $50 million. If we fail, the bank forecloses on this house tomorrow morning. Seraphina puffed out her chest, her massive ego entirely blinding her to the danger. Please, I can charm anyone. I am absolute royalty in this city. Where is this mysterious billionaire taking us? Caspian swallowed hard, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The VIP diamond room. At L'Eclipse. Seraphina's arrogant smirk instantly faltered. Her heart skipped a nervous, terrifying beat. A vivid, horrifying memory of pouring red wine onto a waitress's shoes violently flashed through her mind. We can't go there, Seraphina said quickly, her voice cracking. Pick another restaurant. L'Eclipse's. It's too crowded tonight. We don't have a choice, Seraphina. Caspian shouted, completely losing his composure. Aurelia Equity is the parent company that literally owns the restaurant. The CEO owns the entire building. We have to go, and you have to be absolutely perfect, or our entire lives are completely over. Seraphina took a deep breath, desperately pushing her suffocating panic down into her chest. She needed to project absolute, terrifying confidence. She convinced herself that the pathetic waitress she had tortured 2 weeks ago was probably fired the very next day anyway. She was a nobody, entirely insignificant to the grand scheme of Seraphina's luxurious life. Fine, Seraphina said coldly. I will go get ready. 2 hours later, Seraphina slipped into a breathtaking $5,000 custom silk dress she had bought on a maxed-out credit card. She applied heavy, flawless makeup to hide the deep bags under her eyes, and slipped on her favorite designer heels. She was ready to claim her empire. Caspian and Seraphina pulled up to the grand golden double doors of L'Eclipse in their matte black sports car. As they stepped into the luxurious velvet-draped lobby, the atmosphere felt entirely different than it had 2 weeks ago. It felt heavy. Oppressive, the maître d' stood at the podium. When he saw Seraphina, a cold, highly knowing expression flashed across his face. He didn't offer his usual warm bow. Right this way, the maître d' said coldly, turning his back on them and leading them toward a private, heavily guarded elevator at the back of the restaurant. They stepped into the elevator, the heavy metal doors sealing them inside as they ascended to the top floor. The VIP diamond room was a highly secretive, totally private dining suite reserved exclusively for the restaurant's billionaire owner and their personal guests. As they walked down the quiet, dimly lit hallway toward the heavy mahogany doors of the suite, Caspian was sweating profusely, his hands trembling as he clutched his leather briefcase. Just remember, Caspian whispered frantically. Smile, be polite. Treat the CEO like an absolute god. Calm down, Caspian, Seraphina sneered, rolling her eyes and adjusting her expensive diamond necklace. I know how to handle wealthy people. Whoever this CEO is, they are going to be completely obsessed with me. Seraphina aggressively pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the breathtakingly luxurious VIP suite. The room featured a massive, polished glass table surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire glittering city skyline. But the room was dead silent. The CEO was already sitting at the head of the long table. The massive, high-backed leather executive chair was turned completely around, facing the large glass windows. Seraphina strutted forward, her expensive designer heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. She stopped right next to the empty seats reserved for them, projecting a fake, deeply arrogant confidence that echoed through the silent room. Good evening, Seraphina announced loudly, flashing a toxic, practiced smile. I am Seraphina, and this is my husband, Caspian. It is an absolute honor to finally meet you. I assure you, partnering with us is the greatest decision you will ever make. The room remained agonizingly silent. The soft, melodic hum of the city outside felt miles away. Then, the elusive billionaire finally spoke. You promised a great partnership, Seraphina. A calm, chillingly familiar female voice echoed from the back of the leather chair. But all you have shown me over the last 14 days is an incredibly dark, toxic, and deeply ugly heart. Seraphina's blood ran completely cold. The air violently left her lungs. Her confident, arrogant posture instantly shattered. That voice, it sounded impossibly familiar. Slowly, agonizingly, the heavy leather executive chair rotated around, and the terrifying reality that Seraphina stepped into was a perfectly orchestrated, absolute nightmare. The heavy leather executive chair completed its slow, agonizing rotation, stopping perfectly at the head of the massive glass table. Just seconds prior, Seraphina had proudly puffed out her chest, ready to charm an anonymous billionaire into saving her lavish, superficial life. But as the CEO of Aurelia Equity finally faced the room, the confident, triumphant smirk on Seraphina's perfectly contoured face completely shattered. Her skin instantly drained of all color, turning as pale as a ghost. The air violently left her lungs, leaving her choking on her own sudden, suffocating terror. Sitting in the billionaire's seat was not a stranger. It was Lyra. But this woman was no longer wearing the modest black apron or the sensible, non-slipwork shoes. She was not the quiet, invisible waitress meant to fetch sparkling water. The woman sitting at the head of the table was wearing a breathtaking, custom-tailored midnight blue power suit. Her dark hair was flawlessly styled, and she radiated an absolute terrifying aura of immense wealth, unshakable power, and ultimate authority. She was Lyra, the visionary founder, billionaire CEO of Aurelia Equity, and the sole owner of the L'Eclipse empire. Seraphina's designer heels slipped slightly on the polished marble floor as her knees completely lost their strength. The heavy, crushing reality of the situation violently slammed into her chest. Lyra? Seraphina gasped, her voice a pathetic, choked whisper, entirely stripped of its usual arrogant venom. You are the CEO? Lyra did not answer immediately. She slowly leaned forward, resting her hands on the polished glass table. Her piercing, highly observant eyes locked directly onto Seraphina's wide, terrified face. You told me to learn my place, Seraphina, Lyra said softly, her deep, powerful voice echoing through the dead-silent VIP suite. So, I invited you here tonight to show you exactly where that is. Caspian, completely oblivious to the horrific history between the two women, looked frantically back and forth between his trembling wife and the billionaire CEO. I'm sorry, Miss Lyra, Caspian stammered, sweating profusely as he clutched his leather briefcase. Do you and my wife know each other? Lyra's gaze briefly shifted to Caspian. There was no anger in her eyes, only a cold, profound pity for the desperate man. We had a very memorable introduction exactly 14 days ago, Lyra said calmly. With a deliberate, chillingly slow motion, Lyra reached into the inner pocket of her tailored suit jacket. She pulled out a small, tightly crumpled ball of green paper. She placed it directly in the center of the massive glass table and slowly flattened it out with her hands. It was the exact same $100 bill Seraphina had maliciously thrown at her face. Seraphina let out a sharp, horrified gasp, instinctively covering her mouth with her trembling hands. Her heart pounded so violently against her ribs she thought she was going to pass out. 14 days ago your wife came into my restaurant to eat, Lyra explained to Caspian, her voice carrying a heavy, devastating weight. When I served her a perfectly cooked steak, she screamed at me in front of my entire dining room. When I offered to replace it, she aggressively poured a glass of red wine directly onto my shoes to purposefully humiliate me. And when she was finished asserting her absolute dominance over a worker she believed was entirely beneath her, she crumpled up this exact $100 bill, threw it directly at my face, and commanded me to get on my knees and pick it up like a dog. Caspian's eyes widened in absolute unfiltered horror. He slowly turned his head to look at Seraphina. You did what? Caspian whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and explosive, life-shattering rage. Seraphina, tell me she is lying. Tell me you didn't do this to the CEO of the company that holds our entire future. I didn't know. Seraphina wept, her fake high society facade completely crumbling into dust. Caspian, I swear I didn't know who she was. She was just wearing an apron. She looked like a nobody. A nobody? Lyra interrupted, her voice suddenly booming with terrifying, undeniable power. The sheer force of her tone made Seraphina violently flinch. I built this empire from the ground up. I washed dishes to survive. I go undercover in my own restaurants because a person's true character is never revealed by how they treat a billionaire. It is revealed entirely by how they treat the waitress who fetches their water. And you, Seraphina, have the absolute ugliest, most toxic character I have ever witnessed in my entire life. Panic raw, suffocating, completely unfiltered panic violently seized Seraphina. Her $5,000 silk dress pooled around her as she suddenly dropped to her knees right there on the polished marble floor. "Please, Lyra." Seraphina sobbed hysterically, her expensive mascara running down her perfectly contoured face in dark, ugly streaks. She reached her trembling hands out, desperately begging for mercy in front of the entire VIP dining room. It was a mistake. I was under so much stress. Caspian was losing the company, and I took it out on you. I can change. I will clean the floors of this restaurant myself. Just please sign the contract. We will lose our home. We will lose everything. Lyra looked down at the weeping, pathetic woman kneeling on the floor. She felt absolutely no joy in seeing someone reduced to this state. But she also felt absolutely no obligation to save a woman who had built her entire existence on cruelty. "You said I was nothing but the help, Seraphina," Lyra said coldly, stepping away from the glass table. "But you forgot one little detail. I don't just work here, I own the entire building, and you and your husband are never eating in my city ever again." Caspian dropped his briefcase. It hit the floor with a loud, hollow thud. He realized in that exact, devastating moment that his wife's toxic ego had just completely destroyed his entire life's work. "As for your buyout, Caspian," Lyra said, pressing a silver button on the intercom on her desk. "Aurelia Equity does not do business with people who harbor such profound cruelty in their homes. Your company's moral evaluation is complete. And you have entirely failed. The $50 million deal is officially dead." Seraphina remained on her knees on the cold, polished marble floor of the VIP diamond room, weeping hysterically as the absolute destruction of her entire life crashed down upon her. She reached her trembling hands out, desperately trying to grab her husband's pant leg. "Caspian, please, say something," Seraphina wailed, her voice cracking violently. "Fix this. Tell her we're sorry." But Caspian didn't reach down to help her. He didn't offer a comforting embrace. Instead, he slowly stepped back, pulling his leg away from her grasp as if her very touch was toxic. He looked down at the woman he had married, his eyes filled with a profound, terrifying disgust. "Fix this?" Caspian whispered, his voice trembling with explosive, life-shattering rage. "You poured wine on a woman's shoes because you wanted to feel superior. You threw money in her face like she was an animal. You didn't just ruin this deal, Seraphina. You completely destroyed my entire life's work because you couldn't manage a single ounce of basic human decency." "Caspian. No, please," she begged. "We are totally bankrupt," Caspian said coldly, completely abandoning his luxurious posture. "The bank is taking the mansion tomorrow, and the second the divorce papers are drawn up, I am entirely done with you." Without another word, Caspian turned his back on his weeping wife and walked out of the heavy mahogany doors, leaving her completely alone in the sprawling, silent VIP suite. Lyra stood tall, her expression completely unmovable. She felt absolutely no joy in seeing a marriage fall apart, but she also felt absolutely no obligation to protect a woman who had built her entire existence on the humiliation of others. "Security," Lyra said calmly into the silver intercom on her desk. "Please come to the VIP suite. Seraphina is ready to be escorted out." Within seconds, the heavy mahogany doors swung open, and two massive security guards in immaculate black suits stepped into the room. They didn't say a single word as they firmly gripped Seraphina by the arms, lifting her forcefully off the floor. Seraphina kicked and screamed, entirely abandoning her wealthy high society aesthetic as she begged for mercy. But it was completely useless. Lyra turned her back on the screaming woman, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline, exactly as she had done before the meeting began. The security guards dragged Seraphina into the private elevator and brought her down to the main floor. But instead of letting her out the back door, they marched her directly through the center of the grand, velvet-draped dining room of L'Eclipse. The entire restaurant fell dead silent. The string quartet stopped playing. Every single wealthy patron turned their heads to watch the dramatic spectacle. And sitting right at the center table were Vesper and Delphine. Seraphina locked eyes with her toxic best friends. She expected them to jump up and defend her. Instead, Vesper and Delphine smirked maliciously, pulling out their diamond-encrusted smartphones to toxically record her humiliating exit for social media. They laughed openly, proving exactly how fake and entirely superficial their friendship had always been. Seraphina was forcefully shoved out the grand golden double doors. She stumbled in her expensive designer heels and fell hard onto the cold concrete sidewalk. The valet drivers and pedestrians stared as she sat on the ground, crying into her hands as the terrifying reality of her complete bankruptcy finally set in. Her wealth, her marriage, and her entire superficial world were gone forever. The harsh, flickering neon sign of Pete's 24/7 roadside diner buzzed with a dull, highly annoying hum. It was 3 p.m. and the dingy diner smelled strongly of cheap grease, burnt coffee, and exhaust fumes from the nearby highway. Pushing through the swinging kitchen doors with a heavy tray of dirty dishes was Seraphina. She was no longer wearing $5,000 silk dresses or diamond necklaces. She was wearing a stiff, heavily stained brown uniform with a cheap stitched name tag. Her perfectly styled hair was tied back in a messy bun. Her face was completely bare of makeup, and she wore highly practical, non-slip black shoes. Since the catastrophic night at L'Eclipse, Seraphina's life had completely unraveled. Caspian had finalized the divorce, leaving her with absolutely nothing due to their ironclad prenuptial agreement and their massive debts. With her reputation entirely destroyed in the city's wealthy circles, she was forced to move into a tiny, cramped apartment and take the absolute only job she could find to survive: a minimum-wage waitress at a greasy diner. As Seraphina exhaustedly walked past a booth, her foot caught the edge of a chair. She stumbled, and a single drop of dirty dishwater splashed from a bowl onto a grumpy customer's leather boot. "Hey, watch it, you incompetent idiot," the angry customer roared, standing up and towering over her. "Are you completely blind? You just ruined my shoe." Seraphina froze. A massive, suffocating wave of profound déjà vu violently slammed into her chest. I'm so sorry, sir," Seraphina stammered, her voice trembling with absolute terror. "I'll clean it right now." "Don't bother touching me with your greasy hands," the man sneered. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $1 bill, and violently threw it directly at Seraphina's face. "There's your tip, peasant. Now get out of my sight." Seraphina didn't yell. She didn't fight back. Tears of deep, agonizing regret streamed down her face as she slowly bent down and picked up the crumpled dollar from the sticky linoleum floor. As she stood up, her red, swollen eyes drifted toward the small, static-filled television mounted in the corner of the diner. Playing on the local news was a live broadcast of a massive ribbon-cutting ceremony. The camera panned across a beautiful, state-of-the-art culinary academy. Standing at the podium was Lyra. She looked breathtakingly radiant and deeply happy, wearing a beautiful professional suit. Beside her stood a handsome, kind-looking man who held her hand with genuine, unwavering love. The news anchor's voice echoed through the greasy diner. Billionaire CEO Lyra has just officially opened a $50 million academy designed to provide completely free culinary and business education to low-income service workers, proving once again that true power lies in lifting others up. Seraphina stared at the television screen. The crushing, devastating weight of karma settled permanently into her bones. She had lost a multi-million-dollar empire and a life of total luxury, not because she was unlucky, but because she lacked the most basic, fundamental human decency. She finally understood the brutal truth. A person's worth isn't measured by the designer bag on their arm, but by the kindness in their heart. It was a devastating lesson learned far too late. And Seraphina would spend the rest of her life carrying heavy plates, entirely forgotten by the world she once thought she ruled. When we judge others based entirely on their job title or the uniform they wear, we don't prove our superiority. We completely expose our own ignorance. True class and genuine success are never built on arrogance or the cruel humiliation of others. They are built on a foundation of humility, empathy, and respect. The universe has a beautiful way of testing our character when we least expect it, and karma will always collect its debts in the end. Every moment has a meaning, but not every truth is easy to face. If this lesson resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe. Comment character over cash below if you believe that treating everyone with basic respect is the true mark of a successful person. This is Moments and Meanings by Anne, and I'll see you in the next story.